And I call this meeting to order for the Sebastian Budget Review Advisory Committee on 6 p.m. on Monday, March the 5th. We'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Veet? Mr. Hoffman?
Here.
Mr. Herlihy?
Here.
Mr. Napier?
Here.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Ring?
Here.
Okay, approval of minutes for the meeting of January 29th. Did everybody get a chance to look at those minutes and review them?
Yeah, could I ask one question?
Sure.
Ken, page 3 of the minutes. Third paragraph, last sentence. One project that came in at the end of the year and wasn't extended was the Oyster Point drainage. What does that mean? Because isn't Oyster Point drainage still on our list of capital projects?
That is correct.
I don't understand what that sentence means.
If that was my statement, I must have misspoke because it definitely was extended. It was only approved like in.
Yeah, we actually have money spent. And maybe it came in at the end of the year and was extended, maybe we meant it was extended
We set
into.
up the project right at year end. It was like the last week or two of August, I think. And it is still on our project list. And
Right, it's on the project list and money's been spent.
You're right, and or encumbered. So
Should the word wasn't be in there? Or the word should be was
Was.
extended, not wasn't, was.
there again, I don't know for sure if it was said incorrectly at the time,
Right.
or,
Yeah.
but the
Could we
record,
just
the
make
record
that
should show
change?
it that it
Yeah.
was extended.
I would,
Does anybody else have any?
okay.
Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the
Yeah, I would approve the
Minutes
minutes
as
with that
amended.
one minor wording change.
as amended. Second. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Next on the agenda is review of the first quarterly report for fiscal year 2018-19. Ken?
Okay, it is the first quarter, so it's a little bit early to make a lot of assumptions about what the numbers look like, but so I will be brief and just kind of hit the high points. Basically, there's nothing I'm really alarmed about that I see in the numbers that are presented in the comparison to the budgets. I'll skip right on to the projects list. There were 23 projects added for 2018. So that's 23 fresh projects. Of the ones from the previous year that were carried over, including Oyster Point, there's pretty much 3 of those that are the big dollars involved, and that would be the Oyster Point drainage, the Barber Street football field restrooms, and lastly, the septic to sewer monies that have been set aside for grant programs. So there's still some money on the table from those old projects, but it's basically centered in those 3 items. At the bottom of the project list, I've shown you the expenses that were incurred for Hurricane Matthew as well as some on Hurricane Irma. I can tell you that Hurricane Matthew, we've done all the paperwork as far as the submittals to FEMA and to the state. We've responded to all their multiple levels of review. The last information I have is going back to the 21st of February when I was notified, or it was posted on the website for Matthew, that everything had been basically approved and it was sent to finance. So I'm hoping that means that in some reasonable period, that finance will actually get a payment to us. So it'll be 2 weeks this coming, this Wednesday. So I've got my hopes up for that we'll get those monies back. And that leads me to the next
Ken,
page.
just a point of interest. Does the federal government wire money, or do they send a check?
They have our wiring information,
Okay.
but, you know,
It actually comes through the state though, doesn't it? They pass it through the state.
yeah, and I think, if I understand it, the state will put it in the normal system where they pay us our state revenue fund.
It's the same way you get all the rest of
Which
your
is all
payments
electronically transferred. So
from
we
the
are
Department of
watching,
Financial Services. They do it the same way.
so we are watching that flare system to see if there's something pending that we can get a heads up on getting that money. On the next page where we cover the reserves, that the reason I would like to see that money in place, at least before the next hurricane season, is that our emergency reserves will be down to about $3.5 million. Because we paid for all the pier work, we paid for all the debris pickup for both storms. And I would feel much more comfortable knowing we were going into the next hurricane season with our full $5 million reserves, which we should be able to get that much essentially from, or mostly from the Matthew reimbursements because it included the pier work. Everything I can tell you at this point on the renewal and replacement account, including some pending items that weren't paid for or allocated before the end of December, my best guess at the reserve is currently at $166,000. So we've already put some pretty good hurt on that $275,000 that we start the year with. Of course, on investments, there's really been no change in strategy or anything different than normal with that. And the balance of the report are the accomplishments from the departments. So be glad to respond to any questions.
I've got a question on operating expenses for the quarter. I noticed that the MIS department's running, what is it, 58% of their, 58% of their operating expenses. Is there a reason why they're so far over?
Yeah, with that question, let me point out a couple of organizational type things that have happened during the first quarter. Our MIS director resigned, so what the high expenses for the first quarter in MIS are, for a large part, are his payouts of his sick and vacation time. There was only two people, two full-time people in MIS, so him leaving, he was the highest paid of those two. It caused a big jump in what would have been spent for a normal quarter for personnel costs. They've also have a number of maintenance service contracts that are renewed annually, and a lot of those were paid in the first quarter. The majority of those are paid in the first quarter.
So that's just the timing on the contracts.
Yeah, but while we're talking about that, I mean, that's one reason we kind of see a variance in MIS. The other thing that has happened is that we have, and actually I could have pointed out on the budget amendments page, we are wanting additional people assigned to the stormwater activity and keep an emphasis on the stormwater maintenance. So the decision was made early this year in the first quarter to take some personnel that were in other, mostly in the roads and drainage division, and switch them over to be in stormwater. So you'll see a higher personnel cost in the stormwater division, basically being offset by a lower personnel cost in the roads and streets division. Not that that's everything word is, that's not everything we need to do in stormwater. We still may need to be looking at personnel next year as additional people, but these were just rearrangements of people. And like I said, in MIS, it was because of the departure of the MIS director.
Harry, you finished? I'll go. Okay. One question. Kent, let me clarify this one thing, and I know we attempted. Under special revenue funds, in the middle of that page in your summary, it says we are collecting $65,000 less at this time than last year, first quarter. But that's local option gas tax, and if I look at the detail, and the pages aren't numbered, I'm sorry, the first page, it lists total fund revenue, and it looks like we're up about $8,000 for local option gas tax. Sales taxes are up, increased 33,000. And the stormwater utility fund is up about 15,000. Maybe you meant to say we're collecting 65,000 more than at this time last year. I know the graphs are hard to read, and I just suddenly saw the detail. That must be more. That's 8,000, and what did I say? This one's like, the revenue's like 32. And the stormwater is, yeah, that's like 15.
I'll have to go back and research that.
Yeah, it looks like
That doesn't
we're
appear to be
collecting-
correct, you're right.
I mean, my number says $55,000 more for those three. That's a rough number just on the run here.
If it pleases the committee, I'll go back and research that and possibly make a correction before the packet goes to the city council.
Yeah, before it goes to the city council.
Does appear to be an error. I apologize. I think, Bruce, you had asked me a question that I
You know,
wanted-
on the first page.
Yeah, in the heading section on the first page of all the graphic presentations, I made a comment. The golf course revenues were affected by the $700,000 borrowed from the building fund. That word should have been reserves. Because of the $700,000 loan from the building department that was invested into capital, that makes the amount of unobligated reserves come up to about 1.3 million. And I just was trying to say that of that 1.3 million, the biggest share of it, the 700,000, is a result of that loan, because that still needs to be repaid. So it's just that one word where it says in the third line, golf course revenues, it should say golf course reserves. And I'd also make that change before I submitted it to the city council. Thanks for pointing that out.
Anything else? Bruce, you finished?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, nah. Go ahead, Kim.
That pretty much concludes the first quarter report then.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is discussion by members regarding the City Council 2018-19 budget objectives. One is additional street paving work, and two is additional stormwater spending for major neighborhood projects and added staffing.
Oh,
Okay.
excuse me, point of order. Don't we have to, Ed, you're the super guy at this, don't we have to make a motion to accept this and forward it on to city council?
I made a note here and then promptly didn't do it.
Is that the way we do this?
No, actually, what I was trying to do is just get the discussion by the committee, and that's why I provided you the minutes to the city council meeting.
No, on the report, because you take the report to city council next week, right?
The first quarter report, we need to approve it.
Oh,
Yeah, I think that just a motion of order here. I think-
Usually we do have a motion, you're
Usually we do
correct.
that and say, yeah, we're in agreement with the report and forward it on to,
yes.
yeah, I would make such a
As
motion.
discussed with whatever discussions you guys
Yeah,
had, if there
right.
were changes.
Yeah, with the changes proposed, right?
Is that a motion?
Yes.
I second it.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. I guess we all get a vote up here tonight because we don't have any alternate members and we've got less than 7, so we're good. Everybody gets to vote. Okay, now we can go in discussions for the budget objectives. There was a printout in a part of the backup that had the budget objectives and capital improvement. I went ahead and printed that.
Ken
In case.
provided it.
Yeah, it was in the backup, yeah. Okay, we want to start with Nancy. We'll start down there with you.
What am I commenting on here?
Item number 6, the capital improvement budget. I guess Councilman Dodd brought this up, and I guess the rest of the council must have agreed with it, right? Because this seems to be direction to us.
Well, that's why I provided the minutes to the meeting. There wasn't actual action taken on that, I don't believe. They had discussion.
There wasn't a vote.
It wasn't actually a vote.
No. I watched the entire meeting. And then I went back and looked at it later after I read this again, and it went round and round, and they just couldn't seem to bring themselves to vote on what Dodd had written or even a modification of it. But at the same time, it looked as though that's what they wanted to do. And I was going to speak tonight to it. The thing that seemed to come up most of the time, roads, roads, roads. Did you get that impression?
The roads and drainage.
Roads and drainage, yes.
And also the idea, and that's why I listed it on the agenda cover, is the additional staffing. They feel like they're, again, in those two areas that, ongoing maintenance needed to be enhanced as well as additional capital expenditures.
Yeah, I got the impression that the council was interested in or willing to accept the idea that we're going to have to add some people back in, especially in DPW, in that whole area. But the road situation, it wasn't just paving, and I thought they didn't go far enough and look forward a little bit, because there were a couple of projects, one in particular, that has been put on the shelf, and I think that the city needs badly. And I'll speak to it for a moment, if I may.
Sure.
Basically, what do we spend? We got a grant for over $1 million and redid Barber from 512 to Schumann. That was 3 or 4 years ago. And we didn't do anything else to Barber. And if any of you travel on Barber east of Schumann, and you go a little ways, and then you take a sharp 90-degree turn at Pelican Island, and the road falls apart for a while, and then it gets better by the manufactured home place, and then it takes some big curves, goes over the railroad tracks, sort of narrows and is bad again. This is one of our main gateway roads into this city, and frankly, it looks awful, and it doesn't drive very well. We had a project started a number of years ago to straighten out that barber at Pelican Island and fix that whole situation. And on top of that, we're not maintaining that particular area. I've discussed it a couple of times with people within the city. We haven't even gotten the patch truck over there, which I think is a shame. And the potholes are getting bigger. So anyhow, I'd like to see us in the budget, and I would suggest that this is a project that we need to talk either to the city manager and the DPW director, Mr. Baker. Mr. Griffin's got to decide whether he wants to bring Mr. Baker or how he wants to handle that. It's not for us to call somebody here and ask them questions. It's got to go through you to the city manager, right?
I can pass that on.
Yeah, we look at that project. And the other project is, and this is a personal thing, I think the 512 corridor is an ugly slash right down through our city. It just looks awful. We tried to do some planting and we've let it go at a couple of the intersections. The plants, for the most part, have died off for lack of care or whatever, lack of water. But the whole 512 corridor needs attention. Should we get some grants? Should we try, make a long-range plan? But it's a major part of our city, even though it's owned and operated by the county. It's us. And we've sort of just shrugged our shoulders and let it go. We've done a couple of things, and the county's let us do it. But I'd like to see us talk about that in upcoming budget on those two things. And the other thing, obviously, is we have this list that we got in the material of the additional roads to be done. They've already started or maybe already finished Keystone Drive. But should we recommend pulling some of these streets up and doing them in the new budget year? That's a question. It's a matter of money. And my last point is, should we bring them up and get them done now because it's just going to cost us more in the future? Because as the price of oil probably will go up, so will the price of asphalt. So it'll just cost us more money. So those are the projects I'd like to see looked at and discuss whether we bring some of these roads up, whether we can afford more, or how much more we can get done in this new budget year to bring these roads forward. End of comment.
Well, the 512 seems to me like that would be a project for the county MPO.
They won't do it.
Who's the city's, well, the city has a representative on the MPO. They need to talk to Phil Mattson.
They won't do it.
I'm on the advisory committee for the MPO.
Yeah.
512 was like a project name that nobody wants to talk about on that thing. I did bring it up at one of the meetings late last year, I don't know, October, November, about, are you guys gonna finish this project or is it gonna drag on to Easter, right? I mean, they like just stopped the paving project for a while.
Well, I think that was a
As far as
contractor
they're-
issue.
As far as they're concerned, I think they're done. I haven't heard any discussion, conversation, or anything about doing anything for landscaping.
Well, you have to look at that MPO plan. They have a 1 year, 5
No, I
year.
guarantee you, there is nothing on there.
I haven't looked at that thing in a couple of years, Bruce.
Their next project, their main 2 projects that they want to get done that are on their
I'm on.
MPO schedule. Am I okay?
Yeah. He sent a message, just turn on the
Oh,
microphone.
I'm sorry, it's not going, usually I'm told I'm too loud to begin with. Their projects are the 510 project and finishing off 66th Street and bringing it up to Barber, right? That's where that's supposed to come to.
Well, ultimately, it'll come to 510 first, and then they'll bring it on
Well,
through.
they're going right through 510 and right on up to Barber Street, as I understand.
Last I heard, they had a little right-of-way issue down there they were still working on.
Those are their two priorities.
And they want to build a wonderful traffic
The
circle.
roundabout.
Roundabout.
Well, that's down, yeah, that's down on 510.
Yeah.
I got enough of those in Europe.
But, you know,
But still,
And-
that's
and the
something we could pursue. We could, bring it to the council's attention and let whoever the city council representative on the MPO is, bring it up, and that's how you get things on the agenda.
see, part of the problem of doing landscaping on 512 is based, as I understand it, based on state law, state rules. You can't do the planting unless you put the, what do they call them? The berm, the concrete,
The root barrier?
yeah, unless you put a barrier, it's about this high, made out
Yeah,
of concrete.
right.
I've forgotten what you call it.
Root
But,
barrier.
yeah, unless you do that all along that road. And of course, they just paved it, most of it, finally.
Well, I doubt they'd put any landscaping out there anyway. They'd probably be on the other side of or right there by the sidewalk. You know where the sidewalk is on the north side?
Oh, yeah, they've got those, they put those big trees in.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about if you go outside of Sebastian on 512, they've done a fair amount of landscaping. Not enough, but a fair amount. Nowhere near what we've got now. But if you go west of 510 on 512, out by the middle school, and on out to 95, there's some fairly good landscaping there, and they keep it up. But we've got nothing. We've just got an ugly scar running down through the city. Again, personal opinion. A lot of other people have said to me, oh,
Yeah, well, I wouldn't object to putting some money in the budget, but you have to get the county's Public Works Department's permission to work in there right away.
oh, I think they would do it. I think we're going to have to get a grant for this, because it's,
They still
It's
give
a
that iced tea money, that inner surface?
it's.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Nancy.
I believe years ago, the city did get grants to do landscaping in the medians on 512, at Barber Street, 512. There were 2 or 3 medians, and at that time, we took over. The county's not responsible for those anymore. The city agreed to the triangle where the flagpole is.
Have you
The
seen-
county's not responsible for those, the city is, I thought.
Right. Have you
Because
seen
we-
them?
Well, I know, but the county's not going to do anything
Oh,
because
no.
the city said, we want to take
They actually have
responsibility
an
for these.
interlocal agreement that did that?
I believe so.
But we
Do you
didn't,
remember, Ken?
but we didn't get.
Because we got grants and we put landscaping in there, and if we go in and do something with them again now we need more personnel, we have to maintain it all, do we really want to go there at this point?
Well, you're talking, and easy, you're talking this project, to do that project, you're talking $1 million plus, no doubt. That's why
I would rather see the money go to repaving the roads that we
Oh,
have now
I
that
think
need
that's
that.
true. That's why-
I don't think now's the time to put that there, but that's just my opinion.
No, I agree with you. That's why I prefaced my remarks, if you remember, I said, this is something we've got to get a
Yeah.
grant. Now, big if, who knows what Congress will ever do on an infrastructure bill? We got over $1 million to do Barber from a previous federal infrastructure bill. So should we get ready for the possibility of that? Just some long-range thinking, something to think about.
I'd like to take a look at that interlocal agreement and see whose responsibility it is and where. That seems to me like the first place to start.
If I remember correctly, there were 2 transactions. The first one was the triangle down by the, I guess it's the middle school.
Where the road forks.
Where the road divides, just before the real estate office, Bolero and Bolero.
Yeah.
And that was the first one. And then the second one were the three that Nancy just mentioned.
I actually think those were first and the triangle was second, but
Okay.
it doesn't really matter.
Didn't they amend the CRA plan and add that triangle into the CRA some years back
Yeah.
to make it eligible for CRA funds?
It could be, but we got approval, we did it, we did some nice planting, we put in water, put in pumps, they're still there. And for some reason, almost everything died off. I don't know whether we didn't take care of it or what happened, but that doesn't look very good anymore. But to do the whole thing from Roseland Road to Route 1, a number of years ago, the guess was well over $1 million. And I think it's a grant, or it's an infrastructure, something from the federal government. It's absolutely not a project that we can take on ourselves. Conversely, the east end of Barber is something we can take on ourselves piece by piece.
And that isn't gonna be something that we have to maintain. Well, with the landscaping, that's adding maintenance.
Oh,
That has to be done on a regular basis.
Oh, you absolutely, if you do that, if you did 512, you're gonna have machinery, you're gonna have mower, truck, and probably a couple of people. It's probably, I'm gonna just throw out a number, I'm guessing it might be $100,000 a year to keep it, if you do a nice job.
Even if we got a grant to do it, we would still have to maintain it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, you're right. It's a lot of money. It's an idea.
I'm kind of with, I would rather just see a nice grass lawn mowed rather than have to spend money on maintaining any bushes or trees or anything. I think a nicely mowed lawn would look, because I would not want to spend any money.
It's sure something we can look at as we go through, work through the process and get to the capital improvement program. It certainly is something that we could look at. It may not be one of the highest priorities, but I looked at that map again that y'all sent out that had the roads outlined on it, and it looked like I had about a 5th generation scanned and put in that email. I could barely see the colors on my big computer. I couldn't tell much about that, and I looked for the old one I had, but I think I've already chucked all that last year's stuff I had.
It's not very good.
If we could find a better copy of that, maybe I still got that email from Joe last year that I got, and it did pretty good. I fooled with it on the computer and got it to print pretty good, and you could read the color code. That's what you need to be able to see, the color code, to see how they designated the streets. And even when I looked at this one, there, as I could tell, they don't have many local streets on there. There's a few more than they were when somebody did this latest survey. When I read all that, it seemed like it was a much more comprehensive job than the other one was. But there's still a lot of local streets, and these local streets needed out of that too. And I think my personal preference would be to take care of the drainage and the repaving and the roads before we get into landscaping. You could do a certain amount of that as you do the road, of course. Or if you can get grants or whatever, but I would prefer to see the money spent on actual bricks and mortar doing the roads and the drainage to try to get that stuff caught up, because we still got areas when we have a lot of rain, we still have areas of the city that water gets up in the streets.
My road.
Oh, I didn't get specific, Andrea.
Are we going down the line?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we back to me now? Okay, I agree that we need to fix our roads, that we need to put priority on that. adding personnel. In stormwater, I'm concerned about how much added equipment and things of that nature are going to go along with it, how much of a cost that's going to be. Because you say we need to add 4 guys, but are we adding another armadillo, 4 more trucks? I don't know where that all goes.
Well, see, I think
'Cause
we need to look at a
could-
list of stormwater projects and see what they've got so we could prioritize them, whether
Yeah.
that be equipment or whether it actually be fixing drainage issues. I think we would need to look at that information so we could prioritize it in a manner.
There's a great question. We have this list of the road
The map.
priority. Is there a list for stormwater drainage projects that you're aware of, Ken?
I can't answer that at this point, but I would, our discussions at this point are conceptual, I think.
Yeah.
Until you start getting the budget packets that show you some kind of explanation of what staff is recommending and
Right.
perhaps what's left off the table, then that's when the priority setting or the changing of priorities would happen, so.
Okay. I just have one more
Pointing out that you
thing.
want, emphasis on roads to the extent possible, that's fair, but
Right?
I have
tell
one
me
more
which
thing.
roads to put in the budget at this point, I mean,
Well, as far as drainage, I would like to see some maintenance of the quarter round that's been put in. The city spent a lot of money putting all that quarter round in, and we're doing nothing to maintain it at this point. And that money is just gonna go like our landscaping did. The quarter round's gonna fall apart and get overgrown, and it's not gonna be doing its job anymore. And you probably, I don't remember the number of how much we spent on quarter round, but
500,000 a year.
yeah, for how many years? It was a lot of money.
4 or 5. Yeah, at least 4 or 5,
Oh, I
wasn't
think
it?
it was more like 10, but,
Seemed like,
but I hate to see the fact that they are not doing anything to maintain that quarter round anymore. And now I'm done.
Okay. Bruce?
I have nothing. I'm fine with, I think there should be, just like we have a project priority list for the roads.
when we get the budget,
I think we
yeah.
should have a project priority list for stormwater.
Ed?
Well, I'd like to emphasize what I said before as far as maybe that would be a good idea to get Mr. Baker and Mr. Griffin, it's up to Mr. Griffin, however you guys want to handle it, and have a meeting and discuss this in the next 6 weeks, 6, 8 weeks, as things go on, see where things are, see where what this committee thinks, what they're talking about, whether we can recommend it.
well, I understand at this point, other than any day-to-day kind of conversations, the departments are still in the process of putting together their recommendations to
Very
the
early
city
still in the
manager.
cycle.
And we're still a couple of weeks off before the city manager would even
Right.
normally be discussing with the department what their collective priority is to come forward in public with it.
That's why I say April, May, somewhere in there.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying
You just
right
say,
away.
okay, to have
Yeah,
some,
no. That's why I said
fair enough.
when they're ready, but let's not wait until June, when the budget is hardened pretty much, and, it isn't worth discussing anymore. Let's get some ideas, see if there's any ideas on this group versus what staff has to say. Maybe we're going to recommend more. Who knows? Don't know. That's all I had.
Okay. Andrea?
I still have a question from last time about the baffle boxes, and I would like to see another baffle box put in, but have they been maintained? Have we been clearing them out like we were supposed to? Again, maintenance of it. Do you know?
As a matter of fact, I can verify that Friday, the truck was down along Indian River Drive vacuuming those things out.
The vac truck
I
was-
saw that
Yes.
happening.
Yeah.
So
As a
I
ma-
can personally attest to the fact that that was happening.
Thank you.
And I can attest to the fact that was happening at 10 o'clock this morning at the corner of Indian River Drive and Davis Street. The vacuum truck was,
Okay, so they worked their way north, because I saw them down around the park.
they do it every 3 months, I'm told.
Oh, good, all right, all right.
That's what, we've got a $400,000 truck.
That's what that big vac truck's for, yes, that's absolutely correct.
They do it all the time.
Thank you. Well, then I would still like to see another baffle box put in where we were supposed to put in the oyster mats. We spent the money on the oyster mats and for the Boy Scouts, those oyster mats, we gave them the money. I'd like to see, we could use another baffle box to help the lagoon. I'm trying to think of where Frank was telling me the best place to put one is, but you all would know where to put a baffle box. Because we could use another one. The oyster mats took the money for the baffle box that was supposed to go in a couple of years ago.
They didn't put a lot of money into those oyster mats.
They put in a grant.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of money put in oyster mat, wouldn't even be enough to look at a baffle box.
No, the baffle boxes were, because I was heavily involved in that, they're roughly $50,000
Yeah.
a piece.
And then you gotta place them.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're probably looking at another 20, 25. And they're in most of the places now. I believe they're in all of the places.
I thought they did that as they did the road improvements.
Because we closed up that fund. We were allocating $50,000 a year, if you remember, something like that.
Yeah, in the
And we
CRA
closed
budget.
up that fund. You remember that we had 50,000, we had that 250,000 we raised a number of years ago. You had the railroad crossings in there. Right. And I think we've finished up. I think we're done. For the moment, until,
Yeah, I thought the President Streets finished that up myself. When they finished the President Streets down on the south end here, I thought that finished the baffle boxes.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay, I was told that we could use a couple of more by Frank when we were talking about the oyster mats, because the money went to them. I think it was 25,000, it was almost like half.
I think they got a little bit of money from the Indian
got a
River
grant.
Lagoon Council or whatever it was. I think they got some money from them to do some of that too, but I don't know how much it was.
The city didn't put 25,000.
No, I don't think so.
No, it was a grant, they got a grant, you're right. It's on. Okay. But other than that, yes, I would definitely the roads, but on the other hand, the drainage, because I know like on my road, and my road is on that list to be done in 5 years, but right now, the water sits on the streets. It would be ridiculous to pave those streets right now with all the water sitting on them. The drainage has got to be fixed first. And I don't know, you're gonna do that in conjunction? Is that what's gonna happen when you pave it? You're gonna fix the drainage? Because mine's quarter round, by the way, and it has not been cleared out, and there's water sitting in it, so I can't even clear it out myself because it's full of water. And yes, the water has been sitting there since the hurricane. So we have a drainage problem up there, a big drainage problem. I'm sorry.
That it?
That's it.
Harry?
Well, I'd like to thank Councilman Dodd for giving us some direction as to what some of the board priorities may be. I know we're not a budget workshop, but we are an advisory council or a board. And since they're looking at roads as one of the priorities, I have to say I agree with most of the members here that that should be our priority also in our recommendations. Talking about the roads, I would think that if the millage rate comes in to where we do have excess funds, that some of those be prioritized towards increasing the amounts to be spent on the roads and/or drainage. I also would like to address the, I don't know if Power Line and 510 intersection is within the city, but if it isn't, I think that we should be talking to somebody, either the MPO or the county, as far as the putting some kind of a traffic light there. That place, especially during rush hours in the mornings and in the evenings, it's very, very dangerous. And I see people pulling out there. I don't know how they escape getting hurt, but that is a very dangerous intersection. It's a very well-traveled intersection by our citizens, so I thought that might be something that we ought to bring to the
I
city
don't think the
council.
city goes all the way down there to 510, does it?
It probably doesn't,
It
but
stops at that subdivision there where you go in. I think it's one of Henry Fisher's subdivisions. I think that's the end of the city limits down there, and I think the rest of that stuff to the south is in the county. So that intersection would be in the county.
and I believe that to be true. I think it goes down maybe halfway, the length of the Power Line Road. But
You're talking
since
about the paved part on the south of Barber.
it's paved all the way to 510.
Yeah, from Barber.
Yes, from Barber. But that is an extremely dangerous intersection that mostly the people using that are our citizens. So I think that's something that someone needs to take a look at. The other is, I bring it up again, is maybe we could do something for the intersections of Concha and Joy Haven along Barber, even if it's increased signage there. The signage shouldn't be that big of an expense, but something needs to be done at those two intersections. Lastly, I'd like to know, do we have resource officers in all the schools in the city?
I think we have a resource.
That, what, floats? Okay. The reason I bring it up, I don't know if the governor's going to sign the bill, requiring a resource officer or law enforcement presence at all schools.
Those are sheriff's deputies, right?
No, they're not.
They're not?
Unincorporated areas, the cities provide their own. And the sheriff, trust me, he's not going to want to take on an additional responsibility like that. That'd be a fiscal nightmare for the sheriff's office.
Well, why wouldn't that be a school board function, not the city that the school's in?
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Sounds to me like a school board function, not a city function.
No. What normally happens is, like with the sheriff's office, it's the school district uses their safe school monies, categorical fund, 50% of the salaries and benefits. They don't pay for any of the operating expenses other than providing an office and a telephone for the resource officers. The cities, I'm not sure what Sebastian has with the school board, if it's the same type of an agreement. If it were, then if the governor passes that, are we going to be, well, we may have to consider the implications of that. I'm sure that $500 million that's earmarked for this is not going to be enough when you look at it statewide. So the money that's passed through is probably going to end up being an underfunded.
Did that bill get out of the Senate yet?
I'm not sure. Today's what, the 5th?
Oh, they got till Friday.
So I think, yeah.
They're in session till Friday.
But all indications look like they're going to pass it, and the governor is championing it. So this could end up being an underfunded mandate that we will have to throw money at.
Aren't they all?
So I don't know what we have with the school district. And then two, I don't know if this bill, if it gets passed, will that require resource officers also at charter schools? And if so, would that be an additional, well, that would be an additional expense for the city. So that's something that we need to keep on the back burner and consider. And we should know in a week whether or not that's going to happen. It'll probably be several months before we know how much of that money will pass through to the city, whether we have to, charter schools now come under the purview of the public schools.
I haven't
So
read the bill. I don't know how they've got it structured. I haven't read the bill yet. I was gonna wait till it gets out of both houses. I don't like to read them and then have it change and then have to go read it again.
But I bring it up for us to think about and mention for the board.
But I still would
and the
think that
council.
would be a school board issue. Yeah, I don't see the city being involved in that because the city doesn't run the school. The
That's
school
why
district runs the school.
I'm talking financially. I do not know what contract we have or any local agreement we have with the school district. If it's anything like the sheriff's office, we get funding, but not total funding from the school district. And it's,
I don't believe we receive any funding from the school district. I think the city on the one that we have pays the full bore. I believe the school resource officer that the city has is funded entirely by the city. I don't recall, and I would know, that we receive any funding from the school board.
well, I'd make a
We
recommend,
have a school resource officer that is in our budget under the police department.
Correct.
Now, we used to get a little bit of fine money. The money for tickets and fines, there used to be a certain amount of it for school resource officers, and that went away years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't come to the city.
Yeah, we used to get some of that years and years ago.
We just have the 2 elementary schools,
Right,
is all we're talking about.
right,
Okay.
right. Just the 2 elementary schools.
well, you'd also,
And you got a charter school.
possibly the charter school too.
And see, I think under state law, charter schools are still considered public schools.
And they share funding through the public finance system,
Well,
so,
I've never seen anything coming through our budget book that says money coming in from the school district.
Not a dime.
There's
I-
no money coming in, Harry.
okay, so that's something that we would need to be aware of. There could be another requirement for 1 or 2 additional
From the state?
resource officers, plus their vehicles and uniforms and all that. If that were to happen, I would suggest or recommend that we negotiate with the school district for their sharing in the cost, since they are getting funding through a categorical from the state, and maybe set up an interlocal similar to what they have with the sheriff's office. They share half the expense of the personnel cost. And I know it's early, but I would personally like to see something before it's finalized from the staff, maybe a draft of the suggested recommendations. I know it'll go to you on the, some people call it a wish list, before it gets pared down. And I think I got a feeling that some of the members of this board would like to see some of those too, where we could also maybe add to that list or subtract from it in their deliberations before we get something more concrete in June, which would, a little harder to change.
You
at
talking
that
about a
date.
list from us?
No, from the staff.
Oh,
What they submit, they have their budget workshops and so forth.
well, that'll be in the budget. All those things will be in when we get a copy of the tentative budget.
On June 15th, right.
And that's pretty much all I have for tonight.
Okay. Very good discussion about that. And the only thing, if you remember last year, I tried to get extra money in there for paving as well. I think that's a great idea, and I think we could maybe juggle some of the projects, and just the money that's in the capital projects fund should be adequate to do that. You could stagger the projects a little bit here or there. But the only thing I wanted to talk about, nobody mentioned it, was the guidance to, it sounds like too, it says the millage rate guidance is to meet the 2018 millage rate. Effort should be taken to meet the rollback rate. Well, if property values rise and we use the same rate that we have this year, that would be a tax increase.
Yes.
And if we use rollback, to get the same amount of money, it would not be a tax increase.
And no additional revenue, right.
Yeah, and I don't, I kind of take it, I mean, like Ed, I listened to the meeting and then I watched it on a rerun. I think he was saying rollback more than this year's millage rate. Was that the impression you got, Ed?
Frankly, it was hard to get any impression out of that whole discussion, because I think everybody was somewhat tentative about where they were headed. I can't imagine why.
Well, they probably want a budget, they probably want a tentative budget to look at so they can see what they've got.
Well, it's always that way, but the city council has almost, I won't call it luxury, but they've got almost 3 months to make changes to the budget, because they get it in the end of June, they get July, August, and they don't have a hearing until the middle of September. So they got 2.5 months.
Y'all have one workshop, Kim, or two?
Generally, in August, I make a presentation, but they
Right, that's what I
actually
thought.
receive the initial draft from staff, the recommendation, at the same time as the Budget Committee.
Right.
So that's,
And
basically.
June 15th would be this year.
Right. And by that time, we've gotten the information from the property appraiser.
At least the preliminary comes out June 1st.
Right.
Preliminary roll.
So they know where we are, and we can have the Budget Committee can have conversations with the city council. If
Absolutely. I
never-
think they review our minutes anyway, don't they? Don't they get a copy of our minutes once they're approved?
Once they go out in the agenda packet, if they,
Right.
they
So
see
they
that,
do
yes.
have access to the minutes, so they know exactly what we discuss and what we talk about here.
yes, yes.
Okay, in regard to other thoughts and ideas for upcoming budget year, I think we've kind of hammered this number 6 to death here, but anybody
Larry?
have anything they'd like to say additional?
Excuse me, Larry, I do have something that I want to remind you all of, because I spent some time last year in the presentation talking about the referendum coming up in November,
Yes.
which is an additional 25,000 homestead exemption
Yes.
to be thrown into the mix as far as what we can afford. That's still out there and presumably will pass.
I'm sure it'll pass when it gets on there. I can't imagine.
Haven't
people
seen one
vote-
turned
I
down
can't
yet.
imagine the voters voting away a tax decrease.
If it depends on how, you're probably right, but some of it depends on whether there are enough groups that say, oh, you're going to get a tax decrease over here, but it's going to pop up over here. Because if the city can't raise the money from the property tax that you've lowered, they're going to raise the millage rate. It's just going to go like this.
But hopefully with things the way they are now, the growth would take care of that, because you'd have 2 budget cycles to have increases in the valuation, and hopefully with the valuation and the new construction, that would be more than enough to offset the loss of that exemption.
You hope.
Well, that's cool,
Exactly.
unless we spend another $1 million on roads and
Well, we'd
swale.
try to take that out of infrastructure or gas tax.
Yeah.
You know, the county floated an idea several years ago to put the second 6 cents on gas tax, but it never went anywhere because the county wanted to keep all the money. And that's shared to an interlocal agreement with the 5 cities and the county. And the county gets about 75% of that money anyway. The county gets the lion's share of it because the 3 multipliers that go into that to do the calculation are mostly within the unincorporated part of the county. And the city, what do you guys get in gas tax a month? About 300,000? 250?
We just got 121,000 in the first quarter. This is the
Yeah, but-
last 4 years.
Yeah, that,
100,000, 108, 113, and we're up to 121.
for gas tax? That's about,
150.
175,000?
yeah. But that's kind of hard to look when you look, especially in the first quarter, Ed, because they haven't, or Bruce, because they haven't done any adjustments to the numbers on there, and that gas tax revenue lags 60 days or longer. Yes. Okay, I think we've talked about that enough. I'm sure we'll have more discussion once we get a tentative budget to look at. Announce the next meeting date. It's tentatively, you got it set for June the 4th. We should have some, well, no, you'll only get, because the 1st of June, you'll get the estimate from Dave Nolte's office, right? Right. Does anybody, is that June 4th? Let's see, I think that was scheduled already. So all we did was rejuggle this one up here. 2/12 to 3/4. So it's still 6/4. June the 4th is still the next meeting. Is everybody okay with that? That's fine with me. Reports from staff. Ken, you got anything else you feel like you need to tell us? Let us know.
No real news. I mean, I did mention the MIS director leaving. We have consolidated MIS with audiovisual. Our manager's a long-term employee that we have a lot of confidence in. And we are really looking at the stormwater issues to come up with a plan as well. It wasn't mentioned this evening, but on the golf course, we've talked in the past about the amount of deficit and, you know, what do we do long-term to try to reduce that deficit?
It's called more rounds of golf. More money, more play. I think the key to that is keeping the golf course in great condition and being competitive with the local, the county-owned and other municipal-owned courses in the area. You've got to stay pretty close to what they charge or they won't play. If you get too high, people won't come. They'll go down to Sandridge. Yeah, they'll go up to the Valcaria. They go to Habitat. They go to the majors. They go to these other courses. But I think Greg does a pretty good job with that. I don't see, and it looks to me like, and looking at the revenue that it's coming up, and I know the last time I checked with the starter out there, the rounds of play have picked up after the course got redone, and I expected that would happen. So I'm hoping that keeps increasing, and I know every time I've been out there, it's been very busy. There's a lot of golfers down here this season, a lot of people out there. So I think the golf course will be okay. If we could lower the rent it pays the airport, that would help it a lot.
Quit harassing your walkers. I know several people who will not go to Sebastian anymore because they're walkers. And
Who harasses walkers? I see them out there all the time, don't we, Harry?
Well, the one,
You mean the staff or other players?
the staff came and was telling the walkers that they were holding it up, and they weren't. It was the foursome in front of them that was holding things up.
Well, it's pretty easy to tell who's got an open hole in front of them. That's not anything that's hard to see. Okay, thanks, Ken. I guess nothing else. The next thing on the agenda is adjournment. If there's anything else for the good of the order, if not, we stand adjourned.